Kierkegaard on despair, why it happens. The human experience is a tapestry woven with threads of joy, sorrow, and, perhaps most fundamentally, a pervasive sense of unease. This unease, which we often casually label as sadness or stress, is what the 19th century Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard meticulously dissected and elevated to the concept of despair, fortidsfivlelse. For Kierkegaard, despair is not just a passing mood, it is the fundamental sickness unto death, a spiritual condition that strikes at the very core of what it means to be a self. To truly grasp Kierkegaard's perspective, we must first understand his definition of the self. He posits that the self is a relation that relates itself to itself, a synthesis of the infinite and the finite, the temporal and the eternal, freedom and necessity. This sounds abstract, but think of it this way. You are a mix of your physical, limited, here and now reality, the finite, temporal necessity, and your boundless potential, your dreams, your spirit, and your consciousness of eternity, the infinite, eternal freedom. The self's task is to constantly relate these elements to each other, to achieve balance. Despair is the failure to properly carry out this relation. It is a state of imbalance where the self fails to accept or become its true intended synthesis. Kierkegaard identifies three primary forms of despair, all stemming from this fundamental misrelation of the self. 1. The despair of not being conscious of having a self, despair of finitude. This is the most common and often the most disguised form of despair. It occurs when a person is so lost in the immediate, external world, in the pursuit of pleasure, success, or just going through the motions of their daily routine, that they have never truly stopped to consider their own spiritual and eternal reality. They live solely in the finite and the temporal. Think of the person who is simply a carbon copy of societal expectations. They chase the conventional career, buy the conventional house, and parrot the conventional opinions. They are busy, but their inner self is dormant. This individual might seem happy and well-adjusted, yet they are in despair because they lack the inwardness that makes the self real. They have, in essence, lost themselves in the crowd. They fear solitude, they fear depth, and they desperately seek distraction. They are focused entirely on the necessities of life, their job, their body, their social status, and have ignored the freedom and infinite possibilities of their own spirit. They are not aware they are despairing, which, ironically, makes their condition profoundly tragic. They don't know what they're missing. 2. The despair of willing to be a self, despair of possibility, the infinite. This form is the opposite extreme. Here, the self is painfully aware of its infinite possibilities, but is terrified or paralyzed by its finitude and necessity. This is the classic dreamer or the romantic who refuses to be constrained by reality. They live in a world of pure possibility, a whirlwind of what-ifs and endless potential, but they never commit to a single concrete action. Kierkegaard observes that if the self is lost entirely in possibility, it becomes abstract and unreal. The possibilities, unbound by the necessity of action, eventually overwhelm the self, causing it to lose ground and sink into a void. For example, a student who has 10 brilliant career ideas but cannot choose one, or a writer who plans an epic novel in their head but never writes a single word. They despair because they refuse to acknowledge the limits of time, resources, and reality. They want to be everything and, in doing so, become nothing. The self ends up dissolving into the infinite. 3. The despair of not willing to be a self, despair of necessity, the finite. This is arguably the most intense form of despair, where the individual, fully aware of their self, actively seeks to destroy or escape the self they are. They find their reality, their history, their circumstances, or their nature intolerable. They look at the finite and necessary elements of their life, their limitations, their past actions, their genetic makeup, and cry out, "I don't want to be this person." This is the despair of the person who desperately wants a different past, a different body, or a different set of talents. They are refusing the necessity that makes them who they are. They are rebelling against their own existence. This form of despair often manifests as intense regret, profound envy, or a morbid fixation on the self's imperfections. They long to be rid of the burden of themselves, but since the self is eternal and can never truly be extinguished, this attempt at self-annihilation is perpetually frustrated, creating the perpetual sickness unto death. The cure, faith, and the theistic self. For Kierkegaard, despair is ultimately a sin because it is a rejection of the self's dependency on God, or the power that established it. The only true way out of despair is not through psychological counseling or societal reform, but through faith. Faith, in this context, is not merely intellectual assent to a set of doctrines. It is a profound, active relationship where the self, fully aware of its finite and infinite elements, freely chooses to accept itself as the synthesis intended by the power that created it. This is the theistic self, the self established and grounded in God. It means accepting one's necessity, one's limitations, one's past actions, while embracing one's freedom and infinite potential, all while submitting to a higher power. It's the ultimate act of acceptance and responsibility. When a person achieves this, they are no longer trying to be someone else or be everyone, but are simply choosing to be the self they truly are. If you found this deep dive into Kierkegaard's challenging but vital philosophy thought-provoking, please consider subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the big questions of existence. Don't forget to give this video a like if it sparked a new idea for you, and leave a comment below sharing which form of despair you think is most prevalent in our modern society. Your engagement helps these ideas reach more people.